Hi everyone, welcome back to DGMZ, Divan-e-Ghalib, Meri Subani. To all our returning viewers, we are very happy you could join us again. And to the new viewers, we are delighted you discovered the podcast and decided to tune in for the first time. Now, if you were with me in the previous episode, you know that we are currently going through Ghazal 31 from Diwan-e-Ghalib, Mai aur Bazm-e-Mai se Yuun Tishna-Kaam, Aaun. Today we are going to pick up the third couplet of this ghazal, which is the last couplet in this ghazal. So today we are going to finish the ghazal. As always, I'm going to read the couplet first, then we will get into the keywords, key concepts, and then finally the DGMZ impression of the couplet. So allow me to read the couplet for you. Darmandagi mein Ghalib, दरमानदगी में गालिब कुछ बन पड़े तो जानू, दरमानदगी में गालिब कुछ बन पड़े तो जानू, जब रिश्ता बेगिराह था नाखून गिरह-कुशा था. Alright, let's do a quick approximate translation. दरमानदगी में गालिब कुछ बन पड़े तो जानू. If in this exhaustion, in this fatigue, we can achieve something, then I will believe it. Otherwise not. जब रिश्ता बेगिराह था, नाखून गिरह-कुशा था. When the thread was smooth, without any knots, right, then the nail had the ability to open knots. So, as always, the approximate translation can be a little strange, but hopefully by the time we get through the impression, it will start making much more sense. So let's start picking the keywords. First word is Darmandagi. Now this is a word complex. It has two words in it, dar and mandagi. Dar is in something, into something, on something, upon something, right? And mandagi is mand se, right? Mandagi is something very slow, something very fatigued, something which is very tired, very weary, right? It can also metaphorically mean being ill, being immobile, right? Not being able to move. Such is the level of fatigue or tiredness or illness. So, Darmandagi as a word complex is used to describe helplessness. It is used to describe distress, some kind of misfortune, or just very physically slow speed. Motion that is almost as good as absent. इस पे फिराक गोरखपुरी का ये शेर, सुकूते शाम में दरमानदगी का आलम है, रुकी रुकी सी किसी सोच में है मौजे सबा. So the approximate translation is, in the silence of the evening, the environment around me is that of darmandagi, is that of fatigue, slowness, right? Almost immobility. The wave of the breeze, or like we call it zephyr, right? The breeze itself is as if hesitating to blow. It is thinking about something and hesitating to blow. Everything is seemingly coming slowly to a halt. Mirza Ghalib ka ye sher, a good one, obviously. आग से पानी में बुझते वक़्त उठती है सदा. गज़ब का ही शेर है बिल्कुल. आग से पानी में बुझते वक़्त उठती है सदा, हर कोई दरमानदगी में नाले से नाचार है. So the approximate translation is, and of course in the background the concept that is playing is that fire, despite all the destruction it can cause, despite all the power it holds in it, is very silent. You cannot hear it, right? cannot really hear fire as such. But Ghalib is saying, आग से पानी में बुझते वक़्त उठती है सदा. But even fire, with its spotless reputation of being silent, even fire makes a noise the moment water starts extinguishing it. That sizzle, right? When you throw water on fire. Ghalib is saying even fire, even the silent fire makes a noise when it is extinguished with water, because हर कोई, everyone दरमांदगी में, in the state of helplessness, in the state of weariness, in the state of misfortune, नाले से नाचार है, is helpless as far as lamenting goes. The lament will escape. The noise will emit. Right? You cannot hold it back. Darmandagi is such a state. So that takes care of Darmandagi. Let's move on to Girah. So Girah is a knot. It can also be a joint. It is also used as a measure, 1/16 of a yard. But in our couplet, it is using the meaning of a knot. So in our couplet, Girah is knot. इस पे कतील शिफाई का ये शेर, जब से असीरे जुल्फ़े गिरा गिर हो गया, मैं बेनियाज़ हल्का जंजीर हो गया. The approximate translation is, from the moment I have gotten captured in the knots of her tresses, I have become very ignorant, very oblivious, very unbothered about actual chains, about actual captivity. That doesn't bother me anymore. From the moment I have gotten captured and captivated in the knots of her tresses. And इमाम बख्श नासिक का ये शेर, सब हमारे लिए जंजीर लिए फिरते हैं, हम सरे जुल्फ़े गिरा गिर लिए फिरते हैं. Beautiful couplet. So the approximate translation is, everybody is roaming around with chains meant for me, and I, on the other hand, I am roaming around with this knot that has captured me, this knot of the tresses of her head that has captured me, right? So they are carrying chains for me, and I am carrying these knots of her tresses on me. So that takes care of Girah. Moving on to Nakhuun. As we all know, Nakhuun is nail. If it is in a bird, then a talon. If it is in an animal, a claw. But in humans, nails. इस पे मजरू सुल्तानपुरी का ये शेर, अब जाके कुछ खुला हुनरे नाखून जुनू, जख्म जिगर हुआ लबो रुखसार की तरह. Beautiful couplet. I think we have quoted it in the past. So the approximate translation is that now, finally, I am able to appreciate the talent of my nails, the talent, the passion of my nails, because now, thanks to my nails, the wounds of my liver or heart, right, have become as red as the lips of my beloved. So the nails of the lover have clawed at his wounds in his heart and liver. And the lover says, yeah, now I finally see on display the passion of my nails, the talent of my nails, because they have turned the color of my wounds into the color of her rosy red lips. And then गुलजार का ये शेर, छाल पेड़ों की सख्त है लेकिन, छाल पेड़ों की सख्त है लेकिन नीचे नाखून के मांस होता है. So the approximate translation is, Yes, the barks of the trees seem to be very hard, very rigid. But always remember that beneath the hard nails lie very delicate flesh. So, by extension, beneath those barks, there are very malleable, soft trunks of those trees, right? So don't get mistaken that just because of the nail on the top or the bark on the top, what lies underneath will be equally hard. You'll be surprised how soft, malleable, and fleshy it is. So that takes care of Nakhuun. Moving on to the last word, which is a word complex, Girah-Kushaa. So Girah we have already covered. Like I said, it is a joint or a knot or a knuckle, sometimes a measurement, sometimes even a gland in biology. But Kushaa is the activity of opening something. It is the activity of loosening something. It is the activity of expanding something. So when you say Girah-Kushaa, what it means is opening of the knot, loosening of the knot, expanding of the knot. इस पे इमाद अली बहर का ये शेर, दिल शगुफ्ता हुआ न फूलों से, कोई कांटा गिरा-कुशा ना हुआ. Lovely couplet. Approximate translation is, my heart never felt happy and cheerful because of a flower, and the knots of my heart never unraveled, never opened, never loosened because of the thorns. So neither did the flower work for me, neither did the thorn work for me, neither did the flower add to my joy, neither did the thorn take away from my grief. हमीद नसीम का ये शेर, निगाहे दोस्त दिल नवाज भी गिरा-कुशा भी थी. अनदर गुड वन. निगाहे दोस्त दिल नवाज भी गिरा-कुशा भी थी, खुला जो दिल पे जिंदगी का भेद जी ठहर गया. So the approximate translation is, the glances of the beloved were okay. There was a moment. I was trying to translate. Okay. So the approximate translation is, the glances of the beloved were both gracious and kind and soothing as they were opening the knots of my heart. So the glances worked twofold for me. They were very gracious, they soothed me, they comforted me, and in parallel they were Girah-Kushaa. They opened the knots of my heart, of my existence. Khula jo dil pe zindagi ka bhed. These glances illuminated the secret of life to me. Such was their impact. Because they were Girah-Kushaa, these glances were Girah-Kushaa, they opened the knot and revealed the secret of life to me. And when the secret was revealed, my heart just stopped, just stood still, reveling in this mystery that was unveiled to me. Such was the impact of the glances of the beloved. Beautiful couplet, beautiful couplet. All right. So that takes care of all the keywords: Darmandagi, Girah, Nakhuun, and Girah-Kushaa. Let's start getting into our impression. Darmandagi mein Ghalib, kuch ban pade to Jaanun. In the state of helplessness and tiredness, Ghalib, only if I see some actual progress will I believe that progress can happen. If progress can happen in this state, only then will I believe that yes, progress has happened. Now, as we covered in the keywords, Darmandagi can be used in two contexts. First is the physical context, which will be weakened, ill, tired, fatigued state, which is making physical movement or physical motion very slow or almost impossible. And then the second context is, of course, the emotional context, right? Where there is this emotional state of misery, distress, misfortune, which is making everything just slow down to a halt. Nothing is working, nothing is getting done, nothing is getting completed. Such is the emotional state. Now, in this first line, whether it is the physical state of Darmandagi or the emotional one, or probably a mix of both, we see Ghalib describe it for us, right? He starts his description with a hard-hitting word complex, Darmandagi. Darmandagi brings into the canvas a state of inability, a state of inaction, which is leading to no movement, no progress, no motion. By extension, nothing is getting done in this state of Darmandagi. The finality of the helplessness of this state is undisputable. Then he goes ahead, and by that I mean Ghalib, then Ghalib goes ahead and joins this word complex Darmandagi with kuch ban pade to Jaanun. When something, one thing, anything gets done or completed, only then will I believe. Only then will I believe. Kuch ban pade to Jaanun is an interesting way of Ghalib throwing a challenge to himself. Ghalib challenges himself to make some concrete movement, some tangible progress in this state of Darmandagi or fatigue or helplessness, and assures himself that if he could make this impossible a possible, then Ghalib would indeed know himself to be someone worth acknowledging for his ability. The self-motivation exhibited in this simple line is not simple by any standards. Such level of self-motivation are signs of a highly self-aware and evolved individual. Urging and pushing oneself in the most helpless and tired state to attempt doing the impossible is not an easy task. बशीर बद्र का ये शेर, इन अंधेरों में जहाँ सहमी हुई थी ये ज़मीं, रात से तन्हा लड़ा जुगनू में हिम्मत है बहुत. The approximate translation is, in this darkness, when even the earth itself was afraid, the earth itself trembled, right? Alone, by himself, this Jugnu is firefly, that's right. So, all by himself, this lonely firefly fought with the darkness, a darkness that even made the earth go silent, even made the earth go silent in fear. This firefly fought with this darkness all by himself. Lot of courage was shown by this firefly. So that is the type of vibe that comes from this couplet, this first line, right? Where Ghalib says, you are caught up in a state of Darmandagi. अब इसमें कुछ बन पड़े तो जानू. If you can make something happen in this state of Darmandagi, Ghalib, then I will give you credit. Then I will believe in your ability. Right? वहशत रज़ा अली कलकत्वी का ये शेर, कठिन है काम तो हिम्मत से काम ले ए दिल, बिगाड़ काम ना मुश्किल समझ के मुश्किल को. What a great couplet, right? So the approximate translation is, if the task is difficult, be courageous, my heart. Do not spoil your chances of success by considering a difficult task to be difficult. मुश्किल समझ के मुश्किल को बिगाड़ काम ना. Don't think that the difficult task is difficult and hence spoil your chances of success. If it is difficult, use courage, my heart, use courage. Beautiful couplet. So that is the type of scenario Ghalib paints for us in the first line. Let's move on to the second line. जब रिश्ता बेगिरा था, नाखून गिरा-कुशा था. When the thread was not free, the nails were able to open knots. Interesting. Now, the first line was where the moral lesson of the couplet lies. The second line is where the wow factor lies, right? Since this is where Ghalib crafts an example to ensure that the moral lesson in the first line hits home and hits home hard. The words and concepts used by Ghalib are, of course, the reason for this wow factor in the second line. So let's cover them first before we dive into the impression. First word or concept, Rishtaa. Now, again, we always share with you these honest confessions, right? So when we were reading the couplet, we were like, okay, Rishtaa is relationship, right? We use this word so commonly in today's vocabulary also, but it was not passing the DGMZ test because जब रिश्ता बेगिरहा था वहाँ तक भी बात समझ में आ गई that only okay the relationship had no knots. नाखून गिरा-कुशा था. That was just not sitting well. I mean, it was just not making any sense, and hence we did our research to realize that Rishtaa used by Ghalib in this second line is actually the Persian word Rishtaa. And we know Ghalib very well, right? He used to mix Persian in the Urdu poetry and unapologetically, right? He used to bring in lot of Persian concepts, lot of Persian words in his Urdu poetry. So for someone like us at DGMZ, our first struggle is Urdu, and if we crack that code, sometimes there is a second layer of struggle which is Persian. So you have to crack that code also. So that is what is working here. So this Rishtaa which Ghalib has used is actually Rishte, spelled as Reshtheh. It's a Persian word which means thread or string or series, with its original meaning referring to a spun thread or yarn from the verb Rishtaa, which means to spin. Therefore, the literal meaning of the Persian word Rishtaa that Ghalib has used in today's couplet is a spun yarn or thread. Now, this literal meaning is also used metaphorically to refer to a relationship or a connection. And that is what we are familiar with, right? And it is used like that because it reflects the twisting and the enduring nature of a spun thread, just as a spinning wheel twists fibers into a strong thread. A relationship will go through its share of challenges, will go through its share of turmoil, and keep becoming or keep spinning into a strong, resilient thread, a strong, resilient relationship. Word phrases like Rishtaa-e mohabbat, relationship of love, Rishtaa-e zunar, relationship of the sacred thread, are all uses of that Persian word Rishtaa. Therefore, the Urdu word Rishtaa, which we are so well aware of, is borrowed from this classical Persian word and has evolved to include additional meanings of relationship, bond, association, marriage proposal. So, Keep in mind that when it says जब रिश्ता बेगिरह था, it's not actually जब रिश्ता बेगिरह था, it is more जब रिश्ता बेगिरह था, when the spun thread had no knots. So that is what Ghalib is using in the second line. So that's the first word or concept. Let's move on to the second word or concept, which is Girah. Like we said in the keywords, Girah translates to a knot, specifically in this couplet. Now, a physical knot can symbolize a difficult or tangled situation. Solving the puzzle of the knot or simply cutting through it can represent overcoming a major challenge and gaining whatever is the required insight. One of the famous stories around a physical knot is the story of the Gordian knot. The famous knot associated with Alexander the Great is the Gordian knot, a legendary, intricate knot said to have been tied by King Midas or Gordias that secured the yoke of a wagon in the temple of Zeus. The knot was made from cornel bark and was tied so intricately that its ends were not visible, making it impossible to untie by conventional means. The knot was later described by Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus as comprising of several knots, all so tightly entangled that it was impossible to see how they were fastened. An ancient oracle or prophecy declared that the person who could untie the knot would become the ruler of Asia. Rather than laboriously trying to untie it, Alexander famously cut the knot in half with his sword. And this act of Alexander was interpreted as a sign from the gods that he would indeed conquer Asia. Alexander's act of decisively severing the knot was widely seen as fulfillment of the prophecy, which was further confirmed by a thunderstorm that night, interpreted as a sign of divine approval. He then went on, of course, to conquer the Persian Empire and much of Asia. The story is the origin of the phrase cutting the Gordian knot, which refers to an act of solving a difficult problem by a swift, decisive and unconventional action rather than by slow and methodical means. So that story gives us a good insight into the physical knot and what it entails. Metaphorically also, a knot is a powerful and universal symbol that represents interconnection, eternity, binding of two or more things together. The meaning can vary across different cultures and contexts, but common themes include unity, continuity, and spirituality. Physically, metaphorically, knots have huge symbolism, depending which context, which culture they are being used in. Now, last but not the least, knots are a famous artifact in Urdu poetry also. There are many symbolisms for knots in Urdu poetry. We will just quickly touch on the most frequent ones. The first one is the knot in the heart, usually in the heart of the lover. Ahmad Faraz का ये शेर, तेरे माथे की शिकन पहले भी देखी थी मगर ये गिरा अब के मेरे दिल में पड़ी हो जैसे. The approximate translation is, I had seen the wrinkles on your forehead before also, but this time when I am seeing them, it almost seems as if they are transferred to my heart as a knot, as if they have become a knot in my heart. मीर तकी मीर का ये शेर, वशूद हुई ना दिल को फ़कीरों के भी मिले, खुलती नहीं गिरा ये कसू की दुआ से आज. The approximate translation is, it did not open even after I met the fakirs or the wise ones, right? There is just no way this knot is going to open today by any prayer. And of course, he's referring to the knot inside his heart. A physical knot, right? That is also a usage in Urdu poetry. Sheikh Ibrahim Zauq ka ye sher. रात का वादा है बंदे से अगर बंदा नवाज बंद में दे लो गिरा ताकि ज़रा याद रहे. Of course, a beautiful couplet with the pun on band, right? 3 times. रात का वादा है बंदे से अगर बंदा नवाज बंद में दे लो गिरा ताकि ज़रा याद रहे. The approximate translation is, my dear one, if you have a promise with your servant to meet at night, then I implore you to put a knot in your bracelet so that you don't forget. And then Ghalib का शेर, हमसे छुटा किमर खाना ए इश्क वहाँ जो जावे गिरा में माल कहाँ. So the approximate translation is that I had to leave. I had to depart from the gambling house of love. Beautiful couplet. I had to depart, I had to leave, I had to exit the gambling house of love, because how do I go there with no currency in my knot? And by that it means no heart, right? Lost my heart to the beloved. So I don't go into the gambling house of love anymore. My knot in my cloak or wherever I put my money, right, is empty now. There is no money in it. And then the last one is the knots of the tresses of the beloved. That is also a very common usage. इस पे मजरू सुल्तानपुरी का ये शेर, खुले जो हम तो किसी शोक की नज़र में खुलें, हुए गिरा तो किसी जुल्फ की शिकन में रहे. Beautiful couplet. The approximate translation is, if I ever opened up, then it was in the eyes of the beloved. And if I ever got tied or knotted into something, then it was in the wrinkles of her tresses. So that's where I opened, that's where I got tied up. Now that we have set up the background context to the 2 key concepts that play in the second line, Rishtaa and Girah, let's start getting into the impression of the second line. Ghalib presents a when-then scenario in this second line. So, when, jab Rishtaa Be-Girah tha. When the thread was seamless and smooth with no knots in it at all. Then, Nakhuun Girah-Kushaa tha. Then, the nails were able to untie knots. So, when that was there, then this was there. The second line, like we said, has the wow factor of this couplet, because in the line, Ghalib mixes satire and wisdom beautifully and elegantly. The satire lies in the word jab, because jab, when, that word in the second line introduces an interesting condition. And the interesting condition is when the thread had no knots to open or detangle. If this interesting condition is present, only then the nails have the ability to open knots. So, when there are no knots to open, then nails can open knots by extension. And here lies the wisdom. By extension, if there were knots to open, the nails would fail at opening knots. Because the condition for the nails to open knots is there are no knots. This is Ghalib's unique style of describing a scenario where people display and claim extraordinary abilities as long as the circumstances are easy, as long as the circumstances are not going to test these abilities. But as soon as these abilities face the test of real use, then interestingly, these abilities seem to dissolve and disappear. मसूद कुरैशी का ये शेर, किसी तरफ ना गिरा का सिरा दिखाई दे, ना कोई नाखूने उगता कुशा दिखाई दे. The approximate translation is, in no direction can I see the head of this knot, the start of this knot, and in no direction can I see a nail, and by this they mean fingernail, that can open this knot. So such is the helplessness, that neither can I see the head of the knot, neither can I see a nail that is fit to untie this knot. The reality of a problem, the reality of a situation which is complex, is the test for anyone's ability and resilience. This is the real test where you can actually assess how able you are, how capable you are. This test will not be passed by many people. In this couplet, Ghalib is putting himself through this real test and realizing that he is failing at it. His nail, his fingernails, that seemed to be very good at opening knots when there were no knots to open, suddenly in this state of Darmandagi are failing to deliver on their so-called ability to open knots. It's almost as if Ghalib is questioning his fingernails. Was your knot opening ability only available when there were no knots to open? Did your ability disappear when actual knots appeared? So that kind of takes care of the second line, जब रिश्ता बेगिरह था, नाखून गिरा-कुशा था. Now, as always, let's take a few minutes to step back and look at the couplet in totality. In DGMZ's humble opinion, Ghalib addresses an important fact in today's couplet. The fact about how severity of circumstances tend to deplete us of our abilities. When things are flowing smoothly, like a straight, untangled, smooth thread, our abilities seem to work exceptionally well. A small knot here, a small knot there, not a problem. We very successfully untie and open it quickly and effectively. But once the circumstances start getting more and more severe, once this smooth thread starts getting tangled again and again, once these knots start getting increasingly complex, the fingernails of our abilities start falling behind. As these adverse circumstances increasingly make us helpless and tired, our ability of knot opening diminishes, slows down, and the knots become more and more complex, more and more tight. And this is where that self-motivation that Ghalib is sending his way. That Ghalib, and he addresses it to himself, right? Darmandagi mein Ghalib. Ghalib, in this state of adversity, in this state of Darmandagi, show me your ability, and then I will agree. Then I will believe that yes, you are able, yes, you are capable, yes, your fingernails are experts at opening knots, if you can open knots in this state of Darmandagi. Very motivating, as always, very inspiring as always. Now, it would be remiss of us if we did this episode without adding this story of Ghalib and his relationship to knots. So, allow us to read this interesting story about Ghalib and his relationship to knots. So it is said that Mirza Ghalib had a unique method for keeping track of his verses as he composed them. According to this story, Ghalib would tie a knot in his sash or a piece of cloth or a handkerchief for every sher or couplet that he perfected during his late night writing sessions. Ghalib was a night owl, and we can relate to that. This practice was necessary because Ghalib often composed his poetry verbally and would be usually under the influence of wine late at night. To ensure that he would remember his work the next day in the morning, he devised this simple physical reminder of tying a knot in something, either his sash or his handkerchief or whatever cloth was available, for every couplet he created in the night. Here is how this process unfolded. Late at night, with only a flickering lamp for light, Ghalib would hum and contemplate his poetry. As a new, good verse would emerge in his mind, he would tie a knot in the length of a cloth to mark that verse. This kept track of the number of couplets he had composed throughout the night. The next morning, when Ghalib would wake up, he would rely solely on these knots to recall and write down the verses that had emerged in his mind last night. He would untie one knot after the other as he would remember the verses and then craft them, write them down. The knots served as a physical reminder to aid his memory of how many verses he created last night. This story highlighted Ghalib's brilliance and his unconventional nature. The first thing that came to mind once you read this story is his excellent memory, right? The fact that he could reconstruct intricate poetry. I mean, this is not normal poetry, right? The fact that he could reconstruct intricate poetry based on the simple number of knots. You see a knot and you remember the couplet. How is that possible? How is that possible? It's humanly impossible to just see a knot and write a couplet of Ghalib's caliber. But that's exactly what he did. His phenomenal memory and his remarkable creative ability are proven by the fact that he would look at one of many knots and remember that this is the couplet that came to mind when I tied this knot. Now let me write it down, refine it, and finalize it. The second thing that the story highlights is Ghalib's unconventional lifestyle. The tale of composing poetry while drinking late night reflects the more bohemian aspect of his personality, which was regularly challenged by the orthodox contemporaries, right, and society around him. And then his distinctive style, right, andaz-e-bayan. The story is often told to illustrate the unique approach to creativity that Ghalib developed, which was unlike any of his contemporaries. This unusual way of documenting his work in progress couplets set him apart from his so-called contemporaries. The story of Ghalib tying knots to remember his verses carries deep cultural significance, both within the context of Urdu poetry and Sufi mysticism. The knot serves as a powerful symbol for memory and spiritual introspection and the paradoxical nature of existence, which were all common themes in Ghalib's works. The physical act of tying knots to recall verses illustrates a connection between the mind and a tangible mnemonic device. In the Mughal and post-Mughal periods, where formal education was a privilege and reliance on memory was essential, this method highlights the power of memory. Ghalib, using knots, speaks to an era when oral tradition and mental retention were highly valued. His process elevates memory from a simple storage function to an active creative instrument. When I'm reading this, just a little personal story. So, I remember my grandmother, right? She used to insist, she was a maths teacher, she used to insist that you should know your tables from 1 to 25 by heart. You should not need a paper and a pen to calculate and multiply. No, these tables should be by heart, on your fingertips. Beyond 25, I will excuse you, but from 1 to 25, it should be solely based on your memory, solely based on what is in your head. There should be no dependency for these values. So that story comes to mind. And then the second thing that the story emphasizes, apart from the memory being used so actively and creatively by Ghalib, is the struggle for creation that he went through, right? The knot symbolized the poet's nightly toil and struggle to capture fleeting inspiration. So he was under the intoxication of wine. For a creator like Ghalib, creativity never stopped. Wine, no wine, right? And it's just so endearing to see that he knew his limitation when he was under the influence of wine. He also knew that probably he's at his best creativity under the intoxication of wine, and he developed a method where he would not lose what he's creating. The untying of each knot in the morning was a satisfying ritual by Ghalib that would help him circumvent, overcome the struggle of the last night, where now he would capture that fleeting idea, that fleeting inspiration into concrete work. He will now put the pen to paper, he's going to draft it, craft it, fine-tune it and finalize it. In summary, the knots of Ghalib are more than just a tool for remembering poetry. They are a rich cultural metaphor for the creative process, the weight of emotional burdens, the human condition, and the complexity of the inner world of one of the most praised poets of any time. So this story was very important because yes, the couplet, even without this story, is complete on its own. But once you know the close, intimate relationship Ghalib had with knots as part of his poetry, as part of his creative process, you suddenly see an additional depth to all what he writes about knots, right? The tying of the knot and the opening of the knot had a very personal significance for Ghalib, in addition to all that he captures in his poetry. Alright, so that takes care of Darmandagi में Ghalib कुछ बन पड़े तो जानूं जब रिश्ता बेगिरा था नाखून गिरा-कुशा था. That brings us to the end of Ghazal 31. What that means is next time we are going to start with Ghazal 32. We hope you enjoyed the episode and we hope you enjoyed this Ghazal. As always, we are going to create a dedicated playlist for this Ghazal so that you can access all episodes in one go. We'll be very keen to hear your comments, not only on this episode, but on the entire Ghazal. For the new viewers, a strong recommendation to access the episode titled Introduction to DGMZ, because it will give you a good insight into the motivation and inspiration behind this podcast. For all our regular viewers, whenever you have time, please go and visit the homepage of the channel. It has all the playlists segregated by topic. Surf through them and pick an episode that interests you. Now, allow me to go ahead and close this episode by sending a lot of love and light to all you dear viewers, and thanks for watching.